Good day, everybody.
Hey, Foley, long time. How are you, bud?
I'm doing great, Josh. I was wondering where you are.
I'm
Have you
still
been on
here.
leave?
Colin's just leading the meetings now. I'm doing a lot of systems work on the back end and a lot of organization and putting things together.
Ah, unlucky. Not the
Oh,
fun
yeah.
stuff. You don't get to talk to me anymore.
It's a lot of reporting, so it's getting a lot of structure in place. It's good.
That's good.
And Mr. Ben helps me out quite a bit, so I appreciate that as well. Thanks, Ben. There's the genius, Mr.
What?
Justice,
What?
Sandy.
Don't use words like that. It's reckless. It creates expectations that,
I did
I'm
that
not
on
comfortable
purpose.
with. Hello, everyone. Ben, Brian, Ollie, Greg, Sandy, Josh.
Hello. And Greg's Nightkeeper.
Oh,
Oh, that Greg, not to keep it. I thought it was actually a real Greg, but it's a,
it's the otter one. I haven't seen the otter one in a
yeah,
while. I've seen a few of the other ones show up in mine. That's kind of interesting.
I don't know.
Hello,
Ben,
Justice.
Ben may have culled some of them already before we arrived. Who knows?
No, I didn't. I didn't kick any out. This is a little weird to have them all. This is a recorded meeting with both a transcript and an AI summary, so the note takers are probably a little overkill, but if people use them, go ahead.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Hey,
Hey,
Colin.
Colin. Let me clean up my desktop a little bit.
Hello, Colin.
Ollie.
Been working with Colin
Okay.
a lot lately.
Alrighty. Um, I don't know how many other people we are going to get today. I appreciate all of you being here. That does make it a turnout, but it's not quite the turnout I was hoping for. Um,
Justice, I have one question. Is this the deck? So I had a deck that came to me earlier from Greg this week. Is this the one with like the architecture diagram on 8 and 9?
I don't know which deck are you talking about.
I'll send it to you, so don't worry. Just keep going.
Okie dokie.
Just trying to get context.
Yeah, I don't know, so probably not then. Um, let me put up the deck that we are actually going to be using today. I should maybe update the date. Today is the 30th of April.
Yes, it is.
I'm going to share and then we can get going, I think. Alrighty. Thanks everyone for attending and joining our technical steering committee. Um, we did have a session, I think this was about 3 weeks ago, where we announced the beta program. So we're going to reflect back a little bit on that as well today. So maybe just to walk through the agenda in detail. Firstly, there is our Linux antitrust policy. There are usually, in particular in a lot of our forums, members from a variety of organizations, and some of those are competitors. So antitrust might be something that you are contemplating. Please contact your legal team if that is something that you would like to know more about. Today, we're going to just quickly reflect back on the beta testing, progress, status, and maybe just a little bit of some statistics about utilization. Also, just quickly want to walk you through or just show the sandbox deployment itself and the shape of that. So the sandbox deployment onto AWS is a new component that we had created specifically to support the beta program and the beta testing. But it is now also part of our full stack deployment so that if you wanted to be able to deploy the full stack in a AWS environment or leverage the deployment anywhere else, perhaps, or through the Docker Compose or the Docker containers and the setup, you'll be able to do that there as well. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome.
Hi there. So I'm running late.
No problem. And then we're just going to talk about the Kubernetes deployment working group. I know that there has been some work already underway, but not formally as a Tazama working group. So it might be worth just aligning that under that particular banner so that we can also keep track of it and so that we could also assist if there's anything that we need to do to support. And then finally, I'd like to end off the session today with one of the core functions of the technical steering committee itself as well is there are currently, I think, a backlog of about 15 issues in the technical steering committee issues log. And it might be good for us to start getting a handle on them, in particular, so that we can prioritize them for discussion and then also move them into a delivery space at some point in the future. All right, starting with the beta testing status. So our sandbox end-to-end is up and running. And when we say the end-to-end, we are talking about functionality that originates transactions come from Postman. They go into our transaction monitoring service API, where they are then evaluated inside the platform. The alerts are generated and then posted to the case management system where a investigator can handle the alert and work through the workflow there. And then at the end of that, we also now have, I think the last step that we were struggling with a little bit was the visualization piece. So that end to end is now fully connected. There is a additional outstanding piece which is almost adjacent to that end-to-end. So the hard-coded data rails that we've always had inside the transaction monitoring service API will now be complemented by a dynamic event monitoring service where you can configure new endpoints and data rails through the Tazama Connection Studio. And then you can also build rules to evaluate transactions or messages that go through those endpoints. Now, unfortunately, there is almost an epic or a suite of changes that are required to be made to the back end of the core services so that we can open up the transport mechanism through protobuf to handle generic message flows. And until we merge that code, which is currently under review, we are a little bit delayed with that review because of all of the work that we've had to do to get the sandbox itself up and running and to troubleshoot the end-to-end as part of that process. We have not yet merged that change to the core. So that will happen during the course of the next week. And then we will also have the TCS TRS internal rails up and running so that you can then create configurable interfaces and then configure your own rules through the Tazama Rule Studio on those rails. So that is also a piece of work that we are very excited about. You will also see, and I think this is a part of it that is exciting for me, is Jupyter Hub is now also up and running as part of our business intelligence stack. So if you want to flex your data science, that would be the place to do that. We are also, along with our community, discovering the shape of the data in the data lakehouse. And there are a couple of notebooks that have been created already. There is a new notebook that we have just loaded that will allow you to look at the shape of the data. So how the tables and everything else is put together so that you can get an idea of what data is available for you to data science. So that is a part of the platform that we are also excited about because we expect that there will be a lot of observability and transparency, reporting and dashboard work that can now take place based on the data inside the system itself, which has always been something that our user base has asked for. And then some statistics here that we have put together. So at the moment, the sandbox is running with 7 tenants. The tenants are from a blend of system integrators. They're also our internal project team is operating as probably the biggest tenant on there, which is the Tazama tenant. And then there's also one or two user organizations, so not just system integrators, but end user or operators that would be interested in using the system. I'm very excited to have everybody aboard. Um, we did have a little bit of a hiccup earlier in the week. I'll walk you through the AWS deployment in a second, and I'll show you where that happened. But the extensions server is running slightly higher capacity than we expected. So it was bursting through its CPU limits, and then eventually AWS throttled us, which brought that server to a halt. So we had fixed that problem by effectively making it unlimited, but we should probably be moving that functionality onto a bigger server with dedicated CPU capacity instead of trying to burst through the ceiling all the time. So far, 162 transactions have been submitted to the system and evaluated. In the multi-tenancy environment, so part of our multi-tenancy setup is to set up a set of users for each of the functions and functionalities in the system. And then you also get your own dedicated network map that is deployed. So when you are doing an evaluation, it is done according to your own configuration. But the mechanism to maintain those network maps isn't fully sort of autonomous. Users can't do that by themselves yet. So if anybody would like to update their network maps to be able to create different rules and typologies, please contact us and we'll help you through that process. At the moment, everybody who is doing an evaluation is essentially using exactly the same network map with the same thresholds and the same configurations. 36 cases have been created in the case management system so far. Through the Rule Studio, there are 4 rules that have been created. There are through the dynamic, the DP, which is the data enrichment API, 2 push jobs and a cron job, and also 5 new connections have been created in the Tazama Connection Studio. So it's good to see people are using various aspects inside the system. And I think now that our back end, our sandbox is stable and up and running, we're going to start checking in with people a little bit more actively to find out how they are doing, what their experience has been like, where they are stuck, or if they need any kind of support. So thank you very much. And thanks also to Sandy and the Paces team for getting our sandbox up and running and helping everybody get onboarded and able to use it. I wanted to quickly give an update just on the AWS Sandbox deployment. So this is something that was very new for us. We'd never done a Tazama deployment in this way. We had originally all of Tazama's current services in Tazama 3.0 and before run on a single instance in our sandbox environment. For this particular deployment, we felt that we should perhaps separate the components across 3 different servers based on 3 sort of general group functions. So the core service will, as always, run on its own instance, which is currently a T3 large, T3 extra large. And then we have the extensions component, which is running on a T3 2XL. And then we have the business intelligence and analytics piece, which is running on a R5 XL, which turned out to be the piece of the deployment that needed the highest amount of resources. I think there are a large number of components in there that even when they are idling, consume a fair amount of resources. So the memory in particular was high demand for the the Apache components that compose our data lakehouse. So NiFi, Apache Hudi, Spark, and so on. Those tools actually are quite resource hungry. So we ended up putting the BIAR on a slightly higher spec machine. We have a load balancer that is sitting in front of the system, so only the one load balancer, but all of the services that need to be exposed are exposed via the load balancer, and the ports are mapped to specific subdomains. So we created the beta.tazama.org domain, and then each of the components are attached to their own subdomain. So you can see them here. There's a TMS service, admin service, the authentication service. These are, you would typically interface with these through Postman, or they communicate to each other or with each other through these. Keycloak, where we do our configuration. There are two instances of pgadmin, one for the core and one for the extensions. We have a Postgres server running on both the core engine for the operational data store, and a second Postgres server running behind the case management system and all of the other utilities on server B. Each one of those have their own pgadmin interface so that we can actually inspect the database. That's helpful for us during the beta testing and also for troubleshooting. If you are running this somewhere else, you might want to disconnect those if you don't want that transparency or observability over the data directly. We kept Hasura running. In particular, on the core service, it helps us to be able to interact with the database directly as an API from Postman. So if we are performing maintenance tasks, or if we decide we wanted to scrub the configuration space, we can still do that through Hasura. And it also helps us to make sure that the integration testing of new components as we swap them out can also still be performed. So Hasura is still there. And then the other components here, your TCS, your Connection Studio front end, your Rule Studio front end, your case management system front end with their associated backend APIs. There is also a Voila instance. Voila allows us to embed the Jupyter notebooks that we have created to assist with visualizations during case management inside the case management system front end. So this instance of Voila is dedicated specifically for the case management system. We are in the process of piloting a Voila instance that is independent and will operate directly on the data lakehouse, so that you can create notebooks over the data lakehouse data and expose them through Voila as dashboards, for example, for executives, or for supervisors, or people who want to be able to track certain things out of the data lakehouse. That Voila piece is still outstanding, but something that we are looking at. NiFi, so that we can configure and interact with it, is exposed on the load balancer, but not something that you would typically want to have open and available in a production setting. Jupyter Hub itself. Jupyter Hub, it may be also just worth calling out for those of you who are not familiar with how it works, is Jupyter Hub is the server-based sort of framework for Jupyter Lab. So when you are signing up for a Jupyter Hub account, and you then log into that account, that Jupyter Hub server will spin up your own Jupyter Lab that is then hosted inside the server, but separated from everybody else, so that you can have your own workspace for notebooks. That was an interesting learning experience for us as well. So initially we had Jupyter Hub deployed as everybody was sharing the same notebook sort of storage space. But with the changes to the configuration we had made most recently, you now have your own Jupyter Lab with your own storage space as well. So it's fully separated. Cannot remember what the the orchestrator here is for the transmission of data from the operational data store and the case management system into the data lakehouse, and that is also for the data lakehouse API. So all of these services are exposed on the load balancer. We did our deployment through OpenTofu, which was also something new for us. I think traditionally we would have used Terraform perhaps, But as you might know, Terraform is BSL 1.1, business source license, so not fully open source. And the Linux Foundation had forked that into OpenTofu, which we then piloted here. For the most part, it's a drop-in replacement. Even if you look inside a lot of the commands and the functionality, there's still a lot of references to Terraform, which I'm assuming the people will eventually back out. But OpenTofu worked fine. That was all of our infrastructure as code provisioning. All of the servers we are provisioning for the hosting of the sandbox was done through OpenTofu. And then the AWS CLI from a Windows machine. Unfortunately, all of the services and scripts and automation that we created is Windows specific, purely because that is what we as a team are using. If somebody out there would like to eventually take this and convert it into something that runs on Mac or on Linux, please let us know. We would very much like to extend that with that additional capability as well at some point. And then there are the three servers themselves. So as I mentioned, the core services, Tazama Core, runs on server A. All of the extensions components, which is basically everything that has a front end, runs on server B. And then server C runs all of the data lakehouse components. And then Jupyter Hub, and will also then run its own instance of Voila once we've managed to get that up and running. Most of the core services as well, so things like NATS, for example, is largely isolated to the core. So we didn't have to replicate that, but the only one that we did have to replicate between the two services was Postgres. We didn't actually want any cross-server traffic around the database if we could help it at all. And we also, just as a security measure, we disabled any kind of port 22 access into the server. So private subnet only. If you want to be able to manage any aspects of the server, you need to SSH into the server itself, and then you have to perform those functions through the server command line. And then helpfully, we also have a number of scripts to automate some tasks. The one that we use often here is the restart service. So we are able to restart a service with a number of switches to either pull down a new container and then rerun it, or just restart an existing container without pulling it down. So there are a number of options that we have there, but that helps us to reboot a container if we need to, or if we have made changes to a container, that's an easy way for us to get the updated container back onto the system itself. All of these functionalities deploy containers out of Docker Hub. So our current CI/CD is as soon as code is merged into the development branch, a release candidate container image is published to Docker Hub. And once it's published on Docker Hub, we can then pull that container into this deployment. So this does not build containers directly out of GitHub. It's easier for us to actually do the compile into Docker Hub and then deploy straight out of Docker Hub from there. Keeps things a little bit simpler. Maybe before I move on, any questions here from anybody? The AWS Sandbox deployment is documented inside the full stack repository. So if you are looking through the full stack repository, you will see that there is a new infra and AWS folder. And you will also see that we have split the original Docker Compose that was in the root of that repository is now in a subfolder, and there are 3 folders for core, extensions, and BIAR. So each one of those ring fences the deployment to a specific one of these services or servers. If you do still want to use the full stack to deploy onto a single server, you should be able to do that. But I would imagine that if you are putting all of this onto a single device, it is going to have to be a fairly big device. So at this point, it's probably best to keep them separate, and then you choose whether or not you can put them onto separate machines, either in your local environment or in a cloud environment, or if you really want to, you can put them all in the same space, but that doesn't seem like it's going to be feasible. Any questions?
Justice, for that single machine, what would you suggest as far as for that server, if you're going to have a big machine like that, as far as compute power?
I, poof, I mean, at the moment, it would probably have to be something with about 32 cores and 128 gigabytes of memory, at
That's
least, I
probably
would
asking.
guess. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then it's not going to be a 100 transactions per second machine either. It's going to be a sort of a development machine for 1 or 2 transactions per second.
Second. Okay.
Okay. Right. Kubernetes deployment working group. When we met, I think when we were kicking off the beta program, um, Festus, who was in that session, said that he would be interested in participating in a working group to take our deployment that is currently in Jenkins Helm for a cloud-based deployment, and then rework that to accommodate the updated Tazama 4.0 stack. And I know I don't want to put anybody in this call on the spot, but I know that there is somebody in this call who has also started working on it on their own to get sort of a little bit ahead of that. So what we would like to do is to create a formal working group under the technical steering committee to bring the people together who would like to participate and contribute in that exercise. And then I think now that we have the Docker Compose environment fairly stable and everything is up and running end to end, that might be useful as an input into that process as well. So you could borrow from the configuration and the setup of the various containers and hopefully transpose those into a Helm-based or a Jenkins-based deployment. So the first thing that I want to do here is, unfortunately, Festus is not here today. So I do not want to speak on his behalf necessarily. But what we would then do is, as the technical steering committee, either Sandy or I will create a invitation to convene the first round of participants. So we will put out a call on Slack and then ask people to volunteer to participate. But just to double check if there is anybody in this forum who would also then like to participate in the process to develop the Helm and Jenkins based deployment for Kubernetes.
Do you have anyone in mind, Justice?
No, I don't know. Roland is keen. Roland is going to help out. Or Roland, are you volunteering somebody from your team maybe?
I'm volunteering fully from my team.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. Thanks, Foley. I know that you've also started working on this already and looking at it. So had some success, which is great because that'll be really helpful, I think, for the purposes of what we're trying to achieve. So thank you. If anybody else, if you're still thinking about it, you're not sure what the participation itself involves, or even if you want to come and see how that process unfolds, you're more than welcome to join. And we will put this out onto Slack, and then we will create all of the sort of artifacts around that. So for the moment, the who is we will set it up. Foley has volunteered already. We'll also reach out to Festus because he did say that he wanted to participate. So we'll ask him directly, and then we'll open that invitation up to anybody else. The objectives of that is at the moment, Tazama has 4 Helm repositories. Foley, question.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but the that Dom person on Slack, he's also done a bunch of work, so maybe we want to reach out to him and just see his time zone, because
Yeah.
he might also be valuable.
Yeah, that's Dom Cremafranca. So we'll reach out to him as well. Thank you very much for that. Sandy, if you can maybe just note that down, in case we forget. But that thanks, Foley. That's really helpful. That'll be great. So at the moment, we have 4 repositories that are tagged with Helm functionality. There's one for each one of the different cloud providers. There's a Google one, there's a Azure one, there's an AWS one, there's an on-premises one as well. And then there is also a DigitalOcean one, which I'm not 100% sure is actually functional. And then there is a proof of concept or sort of the beginning of another one, which was supposed to try and create a generic approach for that would be cloud agnostic. So in theory, you shouldn't really have to have a separate Helm repository for each one of these cloud providers, because I don't know how we are ever going to keep up with rolling these out. And then you also want to be able to do private cloud and so on. So one of my asks for this activity is, can we look at creating a slightly more generic approach here? And also the other thing that I want to ask is, typically this process starts with, we assume that you have your environment up and running, and we are now going to show you how to put Tazama into it. And I'd like the guidance to go a little bit further back than that, to see if there's a way that we can also do the infrastructure as code piece, if we can help script or automate the actual deployment or the provisioning of the infrastructure. I don't know if that's feasible, but I would like to put all of that into one single outcome. And I think we can scope that together as a group when we have the first meeting of the working group as well, just to see what's feasible and what's possible. But those are basically the two things that I had in mind. And if you have some thoughts around that, please join us and then come and share your thoughts when we do the kickoff. The how here is, we do have, and it's probably worth refreshing this a little bit. We looked for where we had published this on our internal GitHub, and we could not find it. So we will just make sure that this is available for everybody to see. But we do have a technical steering committee working group governance document that we would try and follow when we are also setting this up. So it's worth dusting this off and making sure that we have gone through the steps here properly as well. So we'll share this out when we get to setting up the session. Okay. That is everything I had here. I don't know if anybody else has any more comments or feedback here. Fantastic. Right. And then, okay, I think we're doing well on time. Well, ignore this piece. That wasn't supposed to be there. So for the next thing, what I wanted to do was just to go through, at the moment, we have a technical steering committee repository. And this is designed largely to contain the issues that we will be discussing and handling as the technical steering committee and as a community. Some of these have been here for quite a while. So for example, you will see that there is an activity here from July 2023 that we never actually got around to. That was to be able to add transparency or observability over NATS and Jetstream, because it didn't exist at the time. So we had to decide whether we were going to build something ourselves or whether we were going to wait. Maybe now, was it almost 3 years later, maybe the NATS team have done something that we can use. Maybe worth looking at. But these have all been sort of logged and tracked. Most of these are more new. So you'll see there, a bulk of them, probably about 2/3 were registered in this year already. So new things that we knew we wanted to put in front of the steering committee to keep track of. So I had created a project dashboard here. I don't know why it's called that, but that's not going to be the name. It is the TSC prioritization here. And we are going to prioritize, to be reviewed, to be delivered, being delivered, and done. Right? So the workflow here is, we are going to go through things in the backlog and prioritize them for this forum for conversation and review, so that we can decide whether or not it's something that the technical steering committee and the community are interested in pursuing. And then If it is, and we have reviewed it, and we have ironed out any missing pieces or information that we are interested in, we would then promote that into to be delivered. This is the more tricky part of the conversation because we, as you know, do not have our own internal delivery team. So this is typically something that we would then have to find a volunteer or somebody who is interested in doing the delivery, and this would then remain here until somebody is actually working on it. It would be great for us to keep track of it under being delivered. At this point, it would probably be tracked if it is in a specific repository, in that repository. Otherwise, we would track it as an epic with delivery in each of the repositories. Part of our approach to the governance here is if you're doing work in a specific repository, it must be covered by an issue that is registered in that repository. So there will always be a repository specific issue that details the work that needs to be done here. And then hopefully we will start seeing some things coming up and done over here. And we should probably create a column here for, I don't want to say rejected, but not right now. So if we decide that this is not something that we are interested in, or that now is maybe not the time to do it, we can move it into not right now. It's just like another exit category for us. So, okay. What I would like to do is in the time that we have available here, just to go through these and see whether or not these are things that the technical steering committee or this forum has an appetite for. And if so, we would put that in the to be reviewed, and then we would get into that detail at some point. It might also be worth ordering these in the to be reviewed so that we can start at the top and work our way through to the bottom. Multimodal rule processor. This is something that I think is currently being POC'd, so that is the change that we are waiting for outstanding, but this is not necessarily the final and enduring solution. I would like to probably put this into being delivered, but may have some additional things happening. So let's put that there for now. Row level security integration via Keycloak. That is also currently being delivered, so we can put that over there. Some work has already been done. Unless, Folly, is there work here that we need to discuss at the TSC? Do we need guidance from the TSC here, or are we comfortable with the approach that we have at the moment? I actually can't remember.
We can quickly touch base on it. So the last way we decided was that we need that config service that has exactly that design that you've got there. And then I'm not sure if you had wanted that to happen, or did you want to get that past the TSC?
I don't know that
I left
there
it
is
with you
any
last
other
time.
way to do that, because I think we were more deadlocked around capacity, not design. Unless we feel like the design here is ambiguous or has challenge. Is there anything in here that is unclear that you think we need to talk about?
No, I think we were sort of aligned. We had that the last we had was that email that you shared, and then Greg and you and I all agreed. So
okay, so this is just a question of capacity, really. So I'll move this here to be delivered. It's not actually actively being delivered. This one is also one of the changes that came up recently. We currently have a chain of 3 components in our authentication service. So, well, 4 components if you actually count Keycloak as well. So Keycloak is our IAM provider, and we have created a generic plugin for Keycloak so that we can translate Keycloak into something that Tazama is familiar with. And that uses something called the auth-lib provider keycloak plugin. That plugin plugs into the authentication library, which is a software library that we have created for abstraction and to host common code. And that both of those then plug into the authentication service, which is the service that you would call to authenticate your users. So typically what the flow would be then is you ask your user to sign into the authentication service, which then goes all the way to Keycloak to create a JWT for you, which will then define the kind of access that that user has to the system. When we've done some review, there is quite a wide variety of artifacts that are still left over into the older components. So inside the authentication service itself, inside the authentication library itself, there are still some Keycloak references. So essentially, this is just technical debt that we need to eliminate. And there are maybe still a couple of services that are lingering in the auth lib that should be pushed further back into the lib provider. So this is a change. It's not urgent, I don't think, but it is work that we need to do at some point. So would everybody be comfortable if we move this into a to be reviewed, but maybe as a lower priority, so it's not going to come up at the top? Unless we find something that's less important, everything else is going to go in above that. Does anybody have a view on that?
Yeah, what's the impact of that, maybe? That's the piece I didn't really...
The impact is probably mostly regression testing and should be largely transparent. So if you, all of the front end services in the authentication services API will not be affected. It's just the way that some of them have been implemented in the library and in the plugin. So it's was like a rebuild and a version bump, I guess, once you've fixed it. So it's not a big impact, I don't think.
And if it doesn't happen, same answer.
If it doesn't happen, it makes this component more difficult to maintain because some of the things that you think you might want to update is in the wrong place. I wonder if I did this here. Why this matters. I mean, it is flagged as impact low.
Then yes, I think it's fine to park. And if someone else does anything on that on the auth lib stuff, then maybe that can be part of the work done there.
Okay. We'll put that there and then we'll get to that eventually. Or if you say as an opportunity, if somebody is actually digging around in that module, they might as well just fix the rest of it. But you know, I would like to at least get like approval of the scope of this at the TSC at some point. So before somebody does go ahead with that, we should maybe just rubber stamp it. This one, I think we have discussed this at a design level. But there is, where do you want to put this one, Fody? There is work that had already been done, but I don't know that it had been, it's not ready to go. Is this under
That's a
to
dream.
delivered?
That's a dream, and we were hoping we discussed this last, and then we said we're doing this whole config UI and things like that. And then we said once we've done that, maybe we can investigate how to get this done on top of that. So I guess this was not done as part of that work. So we've got a UI now, and we've got an app that accepts config, gets and puts and creates and updates. So now we just need to push that to the services automatically. So I guess that didn't happen with that work. So we still can figure out when and how we want to do this. So what's your current process if someone pushes a new network map, for example? You have to restart everything manually, right?
I have a script that stops the container and starts it up again.
Sounds production ready. Let's go live.
Yes. So we are doing manually working around this at the moment, but we are aware that the config service itself is a gap. And we are re-looking at that because when we originally did the config UI, the components for the Rule Studio and the Connection Studio themselves did not exist. It now looks like it actually might be useful to co-locate some of the configuration services into the Rule Studio. So what we want to do is to get through the current beta testing and identify the exact placement of that functionality, so that we can also see what the current functionality looks like and to see if there's room for that extension, and then spec it and scope it. So that development itself will still happen, but I don't know if that is a constraint for this work, because regardless of how you update the config, you still need some sort of mechanism to reboot that container or to re-ingest the updated configuration. And I would almost want to say, from a priority perspective, there's no dependency, but this one is important anyway. We do kind of need it sooner rather than later.
Yep, makes sense to me.
And we do know how we are going to do it. So basically, this just goes over here. So it's not like we need to review it. This already went through the technical steering committee at some point. So I think we actually had a session at the TSC to talk about how we were proposing to do it. And this was the design. So it's just a question of capacity to execute.
Good first issue. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, good fit issue. We'll vibe code it with Claude. I'm joking. We will absolutely not vibe code anything with Claude on the core services. Thank you very much. Okay. Do we still need this? What is this? This was logged a while ago.
We've already done that.
Have we done this? It's finished.
Oh no, we didn't. This was specific for the unit tests. Oh no, it wasn't. Okay, so that's the library we're using to interact with the Redis actually.
Hmm.
Uh,
This
so
feels
the
like we're
risk
one
remains the
breaking
same.
change version bump away from disaster.
Yeah, exactly that. It's Valky. If we upgrade Valky to latest and Valky decides to do their own stuff, then maybe the client library won't work anymore, which is possibly a problem. And especially if vulnerabilities come, then we'll have to upgrade IORadis. Um,
I
so
would say
it's
we should, it needs to be reviewed, and sooner rather than later.
probably, yes. So when you do your normal, this can be part of your normal process when you fix vulnerabilities. In that same process, you can look at a replacement for IORedis. So how often does that happen, and what's the process for that? Maybe add a please there, because he no longer works for Cybrant. So
No. This is me. I'm
oh, adjust this. I thought you sending
yes.
it to Lane.
No,
You
no.
can do
His
that.
name did pop up briefly there, but no. I'll get an impact assessment and do it so that we can get the presentation done. If I need any help, I'll let you know.
I'm sure he's bored, so you can CC him.
Maybe I'll ask him. Okay. This one over here, Node 20 Bullseye is getting towards end of life. There has been a recommendation to actually switch to 22 Alpine. It's not a big change, but it is a broad change, right? Because it affects all of our repositories, and at the moment we have about 74 Node.js repositories, so it runs in all of those. But it is something that I think we need to consider. I'm just not sure what the priority is. Obviously, these things become more and more important the closer you get to the end of life of a particular component. In some of our automation scripts, we were already out of life for some of the ones. We were, in fact, using the previous version of Node, which had already cycled off end of life. Thoughts on priority? How long do we actually still have on Node 20?
I think it's out of LTS. A bunch of our packages also complain about that. I did an
Yeah.
npmi recently, and then they also said shouldn't be using Node 20 anymore.
Node 20.js, the Iron LTS, will officially support it until April 30, 2026. That is today.
It was a warning, now it becomes an error.
Yeah, now it's going to be a problem. It might actually be worth doing this for release 4.
Remediation time.
Yeah. While we are busy doing effectively going to be a platform-wide release of the software, it might actually be worth doing that on 22. Should we bump this to be a 2D to be delivered?
I
This
would.
is
That's definitely the most important, yes,
Yeah.
I would say.
okay. All right, let's look at that. Huh. Let me just also make a note here. Okie dokie. Um, so this should probably be part of a wider system logging effort. At the moment, we have our own sort of sidecar, and then we have our logging aggregator. And what we have been doing at the moment, specifically for sort of development instances and demo and test instances, is we are logging to the Lumberjack console in Docker. Right, Lumberjack is our logger, our logging aggregator. We also log some functionality or some outputs to the individual container consoles as well. So there's a different kind of logging that we do there, especially for startup stuff. We still log stuff to the console because that's the best place for us to be able to see things that are happening, and it has a low impact on performance overall. Our entire logging strategy probably needs a review. This should be part of that review, but this isn't the only thing that needs to be done. One of the things so for example, at the moment, most of our logging was originally designed for the Elk stack, so Elastic, Logstash, and Kibana. And we have not really been maintaining that subsystem because we kind of want to move to something else. We are thinking about open telemetry and open search. We have deployed open search as the destination for all of the audit logging that we are doing out of the updated Tazama stack. So that is already available now as a component of the system. And in fact, we haven't even, if you would recall from our AWS deployment that we just went through, Elk, Logstash, Kibana, and Elastic isn't even in there. So we are not currently deploying that. So I don't know what to do with this particular item. It probably needs to go into to be reviewed, but as a additional scope item to a general overhaul of the logging subsystem itself. So we probably need to scope out in that particular problem. Does anybody else have a view or a thought here?
No, not specifically.
Because I think that logging effort is going to be quite comprehensive, because we should probably also review not just the where the logs end up, but how we log, frequency of logging, the kind of logging that we are doing in terms of dev logging, debug logging, normal system behavioral logging, beats, and those kind of things. So there's a lot of work that I think we need to do here, and that'll probably be a project on its own and a release by itself. So I'm going to put this here, and then we will come back to that. Monitoring tool for NATS and Jetstream. What should we do with this? I mean, this is a really old ticket. We don't necessarily want to solve this problem ourselves, but it might be worth checking in to see if NATS has a solution. I just don't
I
know
think,
what the priority of this would be. Foley, any thoughts?
yeah, I think we can just maybe expand on it while we have this ticket, because just the one-liner performance, I'm not entirely sure. What do we want to monitor? Do we want to have production grade performance monitoring? Do we want to monitor the amount of things that goes into NATs and the amount of things that goes out, or what type of monitoring do we want, or do we want all of the above?
Shouldn't it be comprehensive fully, right? All the above?
Could be, but it also depends on what do we want urgently and what do we need urgently, and then we can maybe say the nice to have part is to know dashboarding how much things are happening. But then the important thing is when you go live, you need to understand if my NATS is keeping up. Is it getting slower to respond? Is there delays in processing?
The
How big are
performance.
my queues and that type of stuff?
Yeah. Agree on the performance benchmarks. Those should always come first. You don't want that to lag.
So we when we originally did this, we had a problem that we were dealing with, and I think it came out of the performance benchmarking that we were doing at the time, is we simply couldn't see what was happening. And we had to find other ways to do that, and being able to see some of the traffic and the performance inside NATS directly would have been useful. That project is closed, so we're no longer in that space. So I think maybe it's also here as like, do we wait for somebody to bring a tangible requirement and a problem here, or do we actually go look for an opportunity where this is relevant? I almost feel like I would rather wait at this point because we have enough other things to do.
Yeah, prioritize it. I agree with that.
And Foley, do you feel emotionally attached to this at all in any way?
Gonna help. It's gonna help your current deployment. So it would be useful to actually just reach out to your current deployments and ask what they're doing, or if they are doing something for it. Because this is obviously not something that's gonna, it doesn't affect the core product. This is something
Oh yeah,
outside of that and where
that's a
it's
good
running
call.
in prod. So that's maybe a good start.
How do you feel about it, Josh? Would you like to check in with people and see if they're missing observability and transparency over NATS traffic in their Tazama deployments?
I can do that if it's a priority for us to get to performance after the deployment. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And you can frame that as what are you doing to monitor your NATs instead? And then
Hey.
that would make it a bit more urgent because maybe they're not doing anything. And then
That's what I was about to say, Foley, is probably the answer I'm going to get for most of these is going to be, we haven't even thought about that. Hate to say that, but it's the truth.
Okay. So I'm going to dump this over here. And then if we come back, if there's a response, then we can decide based on that.
Perfect.
This is, I think, sort of a long-term target. What we've always wanted to do was to be able to say if somebody's making changes to a component, that component should be performance benchmarked in isolation against previous performance benchmarking metrics to make sure that you are not making the performance in that component worse in an environment that is overall very performance sensitive. This needs, I think, some work. We are reasonably sure that we know what is required. It's just a question of whether or not this is, I mean, I guess to a certain extent it is important because at the moment, for example, since we did our previous performance benchmarking that benchmarked Tazama at 2,750 evaluations per second, we have completely replaced the back-end database for the system, right? So did that, which was a fairly major infrastructure change, which would inevitably have had an impact on performance, did that make it better or worse? And to what extent can we still claim that we are capable of 2,750 evaluations per second, or we might actually be in an even better position, but we have no way of knowing. Performance benchmarking by itself is extremely costly and time consuming.
So are you looking for a workaround to use other people's instances to provide the Postgres DB kind of performance benchmark?
Honestly, I don't know. I think what I would like right now is a sense of priority. So how urgent is this to have to do work on it right now? I don't like it that we don't know, but I also don't like this is a lot of work to actually get something going. So I don't like Foley from your perspective, how do you feel about having originally done the work on performance benchmarking, you know the pain that it takes to actually deliver on that?
it would be amazing for Tazama to have this type of functionalities, considering we've sort of got an environment now to have a automated benchmark running every time you do a commit is more feasible now than it was when we originally raised it, because now Tazama has an environment, but also setting all of those things up to be able to test and run that, it's probably going to be quite a bit of work. And yeah, it would obviously be very valuable to keep monitoring Tazama's performance benchmark, especially considering the large amount of changes that's gone in and is going in, and we have absolutely no idea what the performance impact is of what's going in. So I think
Put
it is
it
very
in this
valuable.
list. Like, where would you put it relative to everything else? More important than IO-Redis or less?
Yes. I think IO Redis will become important when something goes wrong, right? So it's a preemptive issue for security. I
So it's
think it's
either at
most
the top
important.
or it's second. It's either first or it's second.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. For me, it's first.
Okay.
to at least get an idea.
iOS also seems like a slightly easier fix. So
Yeah, that's the thing. That's how you decide what to work on, right?
100%.
Priority versus.
yeah, it might be a quick win, some low-hanging fruit, but this one I think is also should be there as an important thing. So it needs
These
some
are
work to be done.
proactive fixes, exactly.
Yeah. We are on time. Thank you very much. This was actually a really interesting exercise for me. It's the first time that we had looked at our consolidated backlog as a group and a team. We are going to continue this work. I think before we start cherry picking things to work on, we'll go through the whole list to get a sense of where everything is at. If anybody has any other issues that you want to throw into the technical steering committee backlog for review, you can log it there, and then we will consider it on the same basis. So we'll add it to the to be prioritized, and then we'll make a decision of where it's going to land. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation and your presence today. We will see you all again in 2 weeks.
Great.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers.